Well, dear friends, welcome to the second talk of the series, which uh, the Aligarh Society of History and Archaeology, ASHA, and Ganga Jamni Foundation is holding. As announced last week, before diversifying and taking up other themes, uh, we had said that we will, in the first few months, devote our attention towards an understanding of three great sons of India who stood for unity in diversity and a shared culture. I mean, Gandhiji, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and Emperor Akbar. Last week, we had a discussion on Akbar. Today, we will have a talk on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, whose 204th centenary we celebrated on 17th October this year. How do we assess him today after the passing of 2 centuries which separate us from him? 19th century was very different from the period we live today. Sir Syed responded to the challenges of his times in manners which suited that period. The thought processes and ideals of those days were uh, uh, also quite different. So the question is Sir Syed and his thoughts still relevant for us today? Related question is, if Sir Syed is still relevant, is he relevant only for those who are at Aligarh? Or is he relevant for the general Indians as well? To discuss this issue, that how we should appraise Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in today's world, we have with me Professor Asim Siddiqui, a former student as well as a professor of English at Aligarh Muslim University, the institution which was founded by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Asim Saab had been in our program before as well. In the previous season of our lecture series, he had talked to us on literature as a window for history. Being a man of literature, he has worked upon, amongst other things, literary theory, 19th and 20th century English and American fiction, South Asian literature, film studies, so on and so forth. He has a monograph on Shahryar published in this very year, 2021, which was published by the Sahitya Academy in the makers of Indian literature series. He has also been a Fulbright Fellow at New York University in 2007. Apart from his academic contributions, Dr. Siddiqui has also been writing for different newspapers and magazines and news portals like The Guardian, The Hindu, Hindustan Times, Statesman, Rediff.com, Scroll.in, NDTV, Frontline, India Today, etc. etc. His critical reviews of books on literature have also appeared in journals like the Book Review, Biblio, and other such publications. He also has done much work as far as translating certain works from Urdu and Hindi are concerned into English. He is also the managing editor of the Urdu translation of complete works of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a project of Dr. Ambedkar Foundation, Ministry of Social Justice. Recently, he was involved in the publication of two coffee table books, one on AMU on its first centenary and another earlier than that on the occasion of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's bicentennial year a couple of years ago. Presently, he is also hosting a fortnightly program in Urdu on English books, on Urdu literature and language for Anjuman Taraqi-e-Urdu Hind. Let me now request my friend Dr. Asim Siddiqui, Professor of English, to deliver his talk on appraising Sir Syed in the 21st century. Over to you, Asim.
Thank you very much, Nadeem Bhai, and thank you very much, Ganga Jamni Foundation, for organizing this wonderful series. It was a pleasure being part of this series last year in its first season, and this season also I am very eagerly waiting for many such important sessions. Nadeem Saab very rightly pointed out certain very interesting things in his opening remarks, that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is a very important name as far as India's cultural heritage is concerned. He also warned us against a certain tendency, and that is we must not forget that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was writing in 19th century. That means the time he was writing, the time he was living, that was very different. But Nazim Saab has also pointed out that there is something in him or something in our past heroes which is relevant, and how we take some of those lessons, how we interpret some of those ideas, and how we find relevance for some of the ideas of some of our past icons in our present times. So that is, I think, a wonderful opening for this talk also. How do we see a man like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who lived his life in 19th century, who was operating in 19th century context, who was living at a time when British imperialism was at its peak. So, with these opening remarks, if I just make some initial observations about Sir Syed Ahmad Khan for those who may not know enough about his life and about his work, it is really remarkable to know a person who has so many different dimensions, who has so many different aspects. Now, what are those different dimensions? We know that he is he's the founder of Aligarh Muslim University. That means that is one very important role. And when Aligarh Muslim University started its journey as a school in 1875, and then, of course, 2 years later as Mohammedan Anglo Oriental College, it was a very important movement in the history of India's education and the history of Muslims' education in India. So that means that is very important role, and it has been discussed threadbare. And every year, Ali celebrate uh, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's role as an educationist. But there are other important dimensions of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. One very important dimension, which is especially important for the present audience, that we can also call him a pioneer in the history of archaeology in India. There are not many works of that kind at that time, and that is why Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's work on some old monuments of Delhi becomes so important at this time, because there he was influenced by, or rather, he took very positive lessons from British historiography, and he was able to talk about some very important monuments, first describing them, and then also using what today we can call methods of semiotics or visual methodology. There he also talked about those monuments in great detail. So that is another important dimension of Sir Syed. He was also a great collector of artifacts, and here also we can see that at that time we did not have this concept of museum that we have today. But at that time he was a great collector, and some of those rare artifacts that he collected can be seen in Aligarh Muslim University, and Nadeem Saab has also done wonderful work in that regard. How he collected some of those artifacts and what is their value, how we learn some important lessons of history from those artifacts. So that is yet another important role. We can also know something about Sir Sayyid's role as far as editing of books is concerned. We know that he edited Aini Akbari. He also edited another very important book, Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi. And what is involved in the act of editing? How we must pay very close attention to different editions of a book, to different manuscripts. We must pay close attention to the spelling of words, meaning of those words. That means all this fine job of editing, all those nuances about editing, which even today's editors find difficult to handle, you can see in the work of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. So that is yet another important role. And another important role that we can identify Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is he is probably also a pioneer of public service journalism in India. And he is also a pioneer in Urdu journalism. And he is also a pioneer of Urdu prose. We often talk about Ghalib and Ghalib's modernism, and especially a certain kind of modernist poetics and modernist outlook in Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib. But if we talk about prose, then that role probably belongs to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. How he could write prose which was very clear, which was explicit, which was free from frills, and that way he was able to call a spade, because he could use that kind of prose without say caring too much about flowery language, without caring too much about using metaphors. Otherwise, you can talk about a direct kind of prose. So, and we know that that direct kind of prose is so important for journalism also. And if I can draw a parallel here, then somebody like Ernest Hemingway, who had a very important experience as a war correspondent, later when he started writing novels, something of that kind of transparent prose is also very much part of his style in his novels. So Satyendra Khan is also a pioneer as far as Urdu prose is concerned. He launched he launched some publications, and we know that the Aligarh Institute Gazette and Tehzeebul Akhlaq, these are two very important publications, and these two publications are still continuing. One very important role that these publications played at that time was they also tried to talk about some grievances of the people. That means if people had some grievances, then those grievances were also aired through these publications. So here you also have this beginning of public service journalism. So this is an important role. And if we talk about some other roles of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, then he was also a great observer of life. He was also a great traveler. And if I talk about one very important book of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, when he traveled to London, he saw life very closely in London. That book also gives you some very interesting ideas how Sir Syed Ahmad Khan could employ certain methods of ethnography. Today, we students of social sciences use methods of ethnography. So there you can see that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, in fact, is using some of those methods. He stayed there, he spent some time with people there, and he observes life also there. In fact, not only that, in ethnography, we also sometimes talk about multi-local ethnography. That means we are not talking about one place, but rather we are talking about different places. And there is also another interesting branch of ethnography, that is indigenous ethnography. So it is not simply England, but as he started his journey, he spent some time in Bombay, and if he talks about some of those people, then that is also an important aspect of his ethnographic method. So here we see that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan appears in different roles. But I would like to focus on some other important aspects of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's work. And that important aspect is his reliance on reason, his emphasis on tolerance, because these are two very important words, two important key words that I would like to further dwell upon in the next half an hour. Reason, and the second important word is tolerance. If I can bring one very important thinker of 20th century, Edward Said. Edward Said knew two different worlds very closely. He knew the Western world. He spent his time at Columbia University. He taught there. He had a career there, and he knew United States of America very closely. But Edward Said also belonged to a different world, which in fact was lost in a way. He also belonged to a world which in fact disintegrated from the map of the world. He talked about a kind of scholarship which he called humanist scholarship, and it is in one of his later works, Humanism and Democratic Criticism, where he talks about the values of humanist scholarship. And it is important to mention this work because at this time, scholarship in literature, scholarship in literary criticism was moving away from humanism. So at this time, Edward Said was talking about a humanist scholarship. And there he talked about a scholar who is both an insider as well as an outsider to the ideas that he confronts. That means he is both an insider, but at the same time, he is also an outsider to those ideas. That means he offers the virtue of reception, but he also is ready for resistance. He has the virtue of belonging, but he also has the virtue of detachment. So if we see these binaries where we have the element of belonging and we also have the element of detachment, we have the element of reception and we also have the element of resistance. We are the insider and we are the outsider. I think this very beautifully sums up Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's work also when he confronts many of those English ideas. So he looks at those ideas as an outsider, but when he looks at some of the ideas which are current in his time or some of those ideas belonging to his society, he is able to see them both as an outsider as well as an insider. This outsider status is coming from his exposure to the ideas which were ascendant in his time. So that way, he was both an insider and outsider to all those ideas that he confronted. Now, coming back to these two very important words, reason and tolerance. I'll say that if we analyze Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's life, all through, he appears a very strong votary of reason. One important quality about a man of reason is that when confronted with a very sound evidence, he or she is also able to change his ideas. That is one very important thing. And another dimension of reason is pragmatism in some respects. Sometimes pragmatism can be a kind of Achilles heel. Pragmatism can be not really a virtue. Pragmatism can probably stop you from doing certain things which may be considered radical but which are necessary. So that's why we often say that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was a great thinker, reformer, but he was not a prophet. He had his blind spots, and we'll come to those things later. Now, when we come to this particular question of reason, here, if we trace his career, we know that one very important movement in Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's life was 1857. That means the revolt of 1857. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan before 1857 was a very different person, and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan after 1857 was a changed person in many different ways. And there was a change in his political outlook also, and there was also a change in his perception of the needs of the people that he wanted to serve. And at this point, he, you can say that he sided with the British during the revolt of the 1857, but he was not alone. There were many, and at this time it is very easy to say criticize him, but that was probably the role that was played by lots of people. After this, we can also talk about one very important work that he wrote at this time, and historians would talk about this work probably with greater clarity. But if we talk about his work, Causes of Indian Revolt, or Asbab-e Bagawat-e-Hind, then from a certain perspective, this work appears to be a very brave work, bold work, because he was talking about the reasons why people were dissatisfied with the British rule. In other words, he was telling the British that these were the reasons why this revolt happened. Now, some of those reasons may appear very, very conservative to say. Some of those reasons may surprise us today also. But here I want to highlight this one fact, that he was able to talk to the English masters. He was able to talk to the English, rather than maintaining silence. He decided to take this risk, and that's why this is an important work. I'm not a student of history, but I was a student of history in my undergraduate days, and I remember reading Bipin Chandra's Modern India, where we see that his work has been quoted number of times in the chapter on the revolt of 1857. Now, if we leave this work behind and we talk about one very important development which took place after this, that was the publication of one very important book by Sir William Muir. And this book was titled Life of Muhammad. This book came out in 1861. That means just 4 years after the revolt of 1857. This work appeared actually in 4 volumes. It's a very comprehensive work. And if we read this work very closely, we'll find that it's a good read. It bases its arguments on 4 important things. It talks about Quran, it talks about traditions, it talks about Arab poetry, and it talks about some contemporary sources. When this work appeared, it created a lot of controversy. And the reason for that controversy was that William Muir had talked about the Prophet of Islam. He had presented the Prophet in a negative light. And he had also questioned some very important beliefs which are very dear to all Muslims. One such belief is the concept of revelation. So that was an important thing. When this book appeared, naturally there was discussion of this book in the vernacular press, and many people were outraged. When I was probing this issue, something really perplexed me, and that issue was, how did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan know about the contents of this book? How did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan know about the contents of this book? because Sir Syed Ahmad Khan did not know English, or at any rate, he did not have a very good command of English language. Probably he could read English newspapers, could understand little bit of those newspapers, but as far as his knowledge of English language is concerned, it was uh, not that which we expect of a person who has command of language. So naturally, its discussion must have appeared. The discussion of this book must have appeared in the vernacular press, and its extracts in translation must have appeared. But in any case, since there was controversy about this book, so Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was really outraged by that. But again, there is one historical fact which needs to be proved further. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan visited England in 1869 and 1870. Now, often the reason given for this is that he wanted to write a rejoinder to William Muir's work. Of course, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had gone to England because his son had got a scholarship, and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had accompanied his son there. But important thing here is that for about 8 or 9 years, this issue of writing a rejoinder was very much there in his mind. So that means when he finally undertook that journey, he decided to write a rejoinder to William Muir's book. Now, the point here that is important at this time is, and the point which is important in our 21st century context is that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is not talking about banning that book. He is not talking about staging demonstrations against that book. He is not making a call for burning that book. No, rather, he is taking a very, very difficult route, and that difficult route is writing a rejoinder to a book. That is one very important thing. In fact, it is not the only occasion when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan took to this particular route. When another book, and that is Hunter's book, which is a very famous book, where after the revolt of 1857, he made some charges against Muslims, and how he tried to establish that Muslims somehow have something against the English rule, that they cannot be loyal to English rule. In fact, in 21st century context, Hunter's book should be read. Anyway, in a different context. But thing is that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan at that time decided to write a rejoinder. Why am I emphasizing this point? Is that writing a rejoinder requires a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of research work. It requires a lot of labor. Burning a book requires no effort. So therefore, one can agree or disagree with his rejoinder. One can probably disagree with his arguments, but one must appreciate his very modernist method of entering a debate, his very modernist method of refutation. That means ideas should be countered with ideas. Book should be countered with a book. A rejoinder should be written with a lot of diligence and hard work. Similarly, it is, and there is another occasion also when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan actually wrote a petition also to the government, and it was in reference to one particular textbook which created some controversy. So when he wrote a petition to the government earlier, there also he was just showing us a method, and the method was either you write to the authorities in today's context, that means you seek a kind of legal route, or you write a rejoinder. Both are very educated means of lodging your protest. Either you seek help from the courts, you lodge a case, or for that matter, you write a rejoinder. So when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan reached England, and from there he has also written some letters. He has written some letters, and there he reveals this important fact that his mind was occupied with this idea. He was also thinking about this whole issue, that how he would face his ancestor, and he's talking about the prophet, how he would face him if he did not respond to William Muir's book. And he also asked his friends in Delhi to sell some of the utensils, to sell some of the articles at his home, so that he could buy some books. That means he is spending money from his pocket so that he could buy books, so that he could also pay to translators when that particular work was written. So finally, he was able to write a rejoinder. He wrote that rejoinder in Urdu, but it was published first in English. Now, here also I draw an interesting lesson from this. When he writes that rejoinder, he also enters a very, say, interesting method of debate. He praises he praises William Muir very highly. He talks about many other important biographers of Prophet. He talks about Gibbon also. He talks about Davenport also, and he praises William Muir. But later, we would see that he also uses some evaluative kind of vocabulary, and he reveals some flaws in the work of William Muir. William Muir had made some very nasty remarks also, we can say. See, for example, one such remark was that somehow he implied that the prophet had written that book. He had also implied that the prophet was very vindictive. He had also written that the prophet laughed very immoderately. In other words, there were some nasty remarks on the prophet. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan looks up looks at this issue in a very, very reasonable manner. And one such method of attack was, he tried to show the weakness of the sources which William Muir used. One very important source that William Muir used, and William Muir used, in fact, all those Arab sources in his book. And Sir Syed Ahmad Khan also talked about one source which William Muir used frequently in his book, and that was a reference to Al Waqidi. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, in fact, agrees with William Muir that it is very important that the authenticity of hadith must be scrutinized. But then, when he looks at William Muir's sources and he looks at the work of Al Waqidi, he says that all scholars, all sound scholars, all serious scholars agree that Al Waqidi is the weakest of all sources in Islamic history. And once he attacks one very important source that William Muir used, he was ready to he was ready to demolish that argument of William Muir. He was trying to show the weakness in his argument. Then, furthermore, he also uses sometimes some words like William Muir's fertile imagination, William Muir's fertile imagination, or his exaggerations, or his prejudices. In other words, sometimes not saying too much, but simply by employing an evaluative vocabulary, he is able to show his disagreement. At the end of the day, when he talked about his book, when he published this book, there was no acrimony as such between him and William Muir. So that means later he was able to resume his friendship or his relationship with William Muir. Probably this is also one very important lesson which we can learn from Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. We often disagree with others, but as long as our debate is civilized, probably there is no reason why there cannot be that kind of relationship which existed before the debate. He also tries to point out the flaws in William Muir's intention. And he says that William Muir wrote that book because he was asked by C. Pfaender to write that book. And Pfaender was a missionary. That means from the very beginning, when William Muir undertook that work, it was at the instance of a missionary. And so the intentions of a missionary were very, very important in the conception of that work. Now, one question arises here. How did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan come to this very modernist method of debate? What are the factors which go into the making of this kind of mind in 19th century? We know that he had a very traditional education, so there is nothing in his background, but he was also a very curious person. He was a man of curiosity that way, and he was also a very deeply read man. We can say that he was familiar with Ibn Rushd, he was familiar with Mutazilite philosophy, and somewhere this blending of reason and religion, or bringing reason into a discussion of religion, was not something bad for him. Although for many people, for many of his conservative friends, it was not a good thing to bring reason into a discussion of religion. In fact, even today, and again I'm emphasizing this point, even today, if you discuss with devout people, with people who are very, very devout Muslims or devout Hindus or devout Christians, it becomes very difficult to bring reason into debate. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, we probably learned this lesson from him. So probably this influence from Mutazilite philosophy, this influence from Ibn Rushd. But another important thing is that at that time we also had many of these Western ideas which were very, very common. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan did not know English, but certainly many of those ideas were in the air. And again, this is a point which has to be verified through different sources. But this point is often made that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was deeply influenced by 18th century philosophy, 18th century rationalism. Not in all respects, but certainly in matters of religion, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan appears very close to certain ideas in 18th century England. There is something of a deist in Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, something of a deist, and that is also reflected in his tafsir, which he would write later. And we know that he wrote his tafsir in 1891, and before that also he had been talking about many ideas which appear very radical even today, because he was bringing in reason in his discussion of religion. So he could speak against angels, he could speak against miracles, he could speak against many of those things which people commonly believe, because somehow his rational mind did not accept the existence of miracles or the existence of angels. Similarly, and there is also one very important line in Islamic interpretation of Quran. That line is that we have to see certain aspects of scriptures metaphorically. So that is also one view, that whether you view something literally or whether you view that thing metaphorically also. And here he came up with one very important dictum, and it was a matter of conviction for him. And that dictum was, that credo was his his belief in the harmony between the work of God and the word of God. So on the one hand, there is the word of God, and on the other hand, you also have the work of God. That means there is nothing in Islam, in his view, which should be against the laws of nature. So it is a very, very important jump as far as say matter of religion is concerned, because even today we do not talk in this vein, and even today this remark can arouse some controversy. So this work of God in the word of God, we see that this is a very important aspect of his work, and we can see this reliance on reason in all his works. Now, the second important aspect which I mentioned a while ago, and that important aspect is his reliance on the virtue of tolerance. When he started his college, the doors of the college were open to everyone, and he has repeatedly made many speeches, and some of his famous speeches where he has talked about this virtue of tolerance. He has also talked about different customs in India. He has also talked about his view of ancient Indian culture, how he takes pride in that fact, and how he also speaks against bigotry. He speaks against flattery. If we read the pages of Tehzibul Akhlaq, and if we read the pages of the Aligarh Institute Gazette, we'll find number of examples where Sir Syed Ahmad Khan appears a very, very tolerant person. And here, tolerance is a very important virtue here. He practiced it in his real life also. And if we have a view of his friends, he had friends from different sections of society. He had many friends, close friends. He always had this relationship with his Hindu friends and, of course, with others also. In fact, some people he had differences with, whether it is Shibli or it is Samiullah. There also you will see that somehow he never let go this virtue of tolerance. There are number of his speeches. There are, in fact, there are one or two speeches which can be considered some bad speeches. But since we are talking about the corpus, the entire corpus of a person, we are talking about all possible works of one person, and we are talking about the entire canon of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. So naturally, there is a lot in his work which needs to be celebrated. Certainly, there are some blind spots. We can mention some of those things today in passing. This is not the time, in fact, to discuss those things in great detail. If we talk about his views on female education, we cannot celebrate him on this count, but we cannot demonize him on this count either, because he was not against the idea of female education. He was not against the idea of education of women, but because he held certain very strange views about women's education. He believed in, say, tutor-based home education for women. So he was not denying this fact. But one important thing is that many of his ideas, in fact, paved the way for later developments to take place. Similarly, his much publicized hostility against Indian National Congress also has to be seen in some perspective. We know that he also made some disparaging remarks against Bengalis. He also made some bad remarks against some social groups. Right? We cannot probably hold a brief for those remarks. But and here I am bringing in Iftikhar Alam Khan, who has written a number of important books on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. I agree with his view that if Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had lived maybe longer, maybe a decade or so, then probably he could well have joined Indian National Congress. Because when he made those statements against Indian National Congress, it was still early days. And he was talking about, he was greatly worried about his college. He was greatly worried for his student. He was greatly worried for the cause which was very dear to him. But this particular stance was not a communal stance. This particular stance was not a sectarian stance. Rather, it had its origin in his care for his college, because there were many others also belonging to his class, belonging to his feudal background. They were also opposed to Indian National Congress. So at that time, it was not a test of patriotism. And of course, Indian national movement will gain momentum a few decades later. And we know that even students of Aligarh MEO College, they also were greatly inspired by some of those nationalist ideas. So what we can say here is that maybe if he had survived a decade or so, he could well have become very close to Indian National Congress, because he was also changing his positions. There was a time in his early years when he believed that Earth he believed this view that Earth was stationary, right? And later he was able to change this belief. That means this idea of rotation of Earth. Later he was able to change this belief also. That means he did not have that kind of dogmatic mind. So here we have a man of very strong convictions, a man who was able to change his views if he was convinced, and if better evidence suggested itself. A man who greatly valued the quality of reason, who greatly valued the quality of tolerance, and of course, a man who knew how to enter a debate using very modernist methods. Enough has been said about Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's modernity. So probably these are some important things which I wanted to highlight. And of course, I just go back to that important point that there are so many different aspects of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's personality, so many different aspects. Just lastly, one point, and this is again a lesser known aspect of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. You know that when he started publishing his journals, when he launched his newspaper, at that time there was the use of lithographic print, and that appeared very very bad. So what did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan do? He preferred movable type. So this was a revolution in Urdu journalism when he turned to movable type. So that means he was ready to adopt that technology which changed the face of Urdu journalism. Similarly, and here, in fact, I am speaking for many of the readers who are like me, who are not as proficient in reading old texts of Urdu as probably we can some modern computer type texts of Urdu. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan also introduced punctuation marks in Urdu. And we know that how sometimes lack of punctuation marks in Urdu prose can baffle us. And he knew that punctuation is important in Urdu prose. So he introduced punctuation marks at that time. And he was a pioneer in Urdu prose in that respect also. So here we have a man who had many dimensions, many aspects. Probably each of his aspects requires a session. But maybe I must stop here. And if there are some questions, I would come back to those questions. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Asim, for a very brilliant presentation of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's relevance in today's world. Uh, as all of us know, that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan actually, during the 20th century and then ultimately during the 21st century, is a very controversial person. The controversy does not limit itself only to the Hindutva forces. Uh, there is a large section of the Muslims also In fact, I would say two sections of the Muslims. One who accuse him, and second who attribute to him something which probably the poor man never knew about. And the end result is that Sir Sayyid today is supposed to be an anti-national, a person who has been appropriated by our neighbors in Pakistan. So in a way, the type of things which you told us about Sir Sayyid are quite relevant and are things which possibly the general persons should know about Sir Sayyid Ahmad. As you rightly pointed out, that in the institution which was set up by Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, not only contributions from all communities were taken, it's not only us who are talking about it, but we have evidence. In fact, the very walls of these structures and buildings created by Sir Sayyid contain the names of those donors. And a large number of those donors were non-Muslims. They were Christians. There was Amidas. They were members of the elite society. They were prostitutes. They were workers. All type of people were tapped by Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan at a time when he was building his organization. And when ultimately the college started, once again we find that during the lifetime of Sir Sayyid himself, there were a number of, in fact, I should say, a large number of students in those short years when Sir Sayyid was alive were non-Muslim. It is not that they were applying and there was no way out to cut them off. आज भी हम लोग ये समझते हैं कि साहब वो कट ऑफ लिस्ट में कट नहीं हो पाए, इतने भर गए. नहीं. He was writing letters to the fathers of these boys to send their sons to his college, MAO college. So, I mean, these are the facts which should be brought up. You rightly pointed out that when Sir Sayyid was looking at the things, whether political or social, he was looking at them from two viewpoints. As an outsider and as an insider. Unfortunately, although Sir Sayyid took great care that he should appear to be civil, both his attempts at looking at things as an outsider and looking at things, being critical of things as an insider, both have now unfortunately made him controversial. I also believe, before I take up questions from the public, there are a number of questions. I also have certain, not questions, but comments which I have to make. But Sir Sayyid has to be revisited by us again and again, not as the person who tried to counter William Muir for writing a controversial book. But as you rightly pointed out, he should be celebrated for the fact that he employed that method during this 21st century, when even a slight suspicion that our religion has been commented upon, we start burning posters, burning offices, as well as lynching. Sir Syed never ever thought of employing any of those methods. You rightly pointed out that Sir Syed, uh, his hands were, I would say, his hands were tied as far as his English was concerned. I don't believe that he would not have been able to read. After all, he had been serving the English for long. He had been a servant of the English East India Company before the revolt of 1857. And then he continued to serve the British Crown after the English East India Company was done away with, after mutiny, when the British Crown became our direct rulers. Sir Syed, even at that time, continued for a long period. Possibly, he was getting his works translated because there is possibly uh, no other reason why his own book appears to be very cogent and a point to point rebuttal of Muir's work. One may, as you rightly pointed out, one may agree with Sir Syed's point of view or not, but it's very much there. I'm sorry, but there are so many aspects of Sir Syed which have to be highlighted. And I am really thankful to you that today you highlighted certain of that facts which his alma mater, his own creation, somehow forgets to talk about. You rightly pointed out we have a museum, but it's a Musa Dakri museum. Even the name of Sir Syed is not there. The main gallery of that museum is devoted to the collections made by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan himself. And in this 21st century, when there are attempts being made to divide us versus them, our authorities should have highlighted that a room full gallery has sculptures, has materials from the temples. The only material from the Muslim past is a single slab. That too, when it was on the verge of being lost, Sir Syed collected it and brought it and fixed it in his museum. One more thing which I would like to appreciate of your talk is that you pointed out that Sir Syed was a collector. I just pointed out the type of collection which he was making, which we should have highlighted. But more than that, at a time when the concept of museum was not very popular, in the campus which he was visualizing, just between the stretchy hall from where he would deliver speeches to the Qawm. Between that structure and the Jama Masjid was a building which was made by Sir Sayyid himself, Nizam Museum. So he established a museum at a time when we were not even aware of the fact that these ये जो हमारी नेशनल हेरिटेज है, ये धरोहर है, इनको हमें
जी।
हिफाजत करना चाहिए. When did the Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan collect all of these material? At a time when he was busy establishing his college. Whenever he would get time, he would then survey the area and collect all this material. He was not concerned कि इसमें कौन हिंदू है, कौन बुद्धिस्ट है, कौन जैन है, कौन मुस्लिम है. No. The other work which you pointed out, Asarus Sanadid, the work dealing with monuments of Delhi. Did Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan discriminate between monuments of the Hindu past and the Muslim past? He collected all. You rightly pointed out that being a person trained in the Persian tradition in the Mughal court, Sir Sayyid knew Persian and Arabic. He was not very, very comfortable in English, and definitely he did not know the Indian languages, whether it was Sanskrit or the scripts of the Indian languages apart from the Arabic script. But what do we find in Asarus Sanadid? All those epigraphs, all those inscriptions which were there in Nagari, written in Sanskrit or other languages, which the poor man could not understand or comprehend, he did not leave them out. He copied them in toto. Some of those inscriptions, Professor Siddiqui, in Asarus Sanadid, they are those which now have actually disappeared. And the only source, and their copying is so authentic without knowing the script, that scholars have deciphered. There was a man who was talking about the glorious past, not of the Muslims, not of the Hindus, but of him. So the relevance of Sir Sayyid today for us is this fact. His memory can act as a balm for the vitiated atmosphere which we are experiencing through the last so many years. With these brief, comments, I would now want you to answer some of the questions which have been asked. One of the questions which has been asked is a question which was asked even prior to starting the lecture was, where are the descendants of Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan today? Are they in India? Do they exist? Where they are? This is the question which was asked by Viqar.
I think Nadeem, we know one lady. I'm forgetting her name, but she often comes here. But I don't know whether she is living in India or she is abroad. You must have met her. I'm forgetting her name.
I gave this question because I also forgot her name. Uh,
Hmm.
but the fact, Vikas Saab, is that
Name begins with say sh. Some shares are something. I mean,
yeah, I
I'm
forgot.
just, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
forgetting the name. Yes. Yeah.
but the fact remains that Vikas Saab, there are a number of relatives of the family which survive. Some of them are in India, distant relatives, but the closer relatives of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan today are in Pakistan. Some of them are also settled in UK. Uh, but unfortunately, uh, we do not know. I mean, जैसा कि मुगलों की रिश्तेदारी में होता है कि हर दूसरा आदमी खड़े होकर क्लेम करता है कि वी आर द रिलेटिव्स, इसमें से कितने डायरेक्ट वाकई रिलेटिव्स हैं सर सैयद अहमद खान के, that aspect is something which I think should really be worked at. But there are certain relatives which survive. There is a question by Ali Haider. Ali Haider Saab asks, uh, 19th century was an era in which reformist movements in Muslim world like Tanzimat reforms in Turkey, Nahda movement in Arab world, Jadid movement in Russia came to exist. Do we have any evidence of these movements having any influence on Sir Sayyid's Aligarh movement? Did he ever make
Yeah,
any?
I believe that. So, and again, this is also a very important point, which probably is relevant in our context. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was not thinking about global Muslim identity. And this is a very important point. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was not drawn by the idea of pan Islamism. So, today, for example, we often see that a kind of global Muslim identity is imposed on just anyone. So, that way, at that time, you are right that there were many such movements. And we can also see relationship between Sir Sayyid's ideas and, say, for example, Muhammad Abdu's ideas at some level. But as far as Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's specific concerns are concerned, he was addressing Indian Muslims. He was addressing Indians, whether as a member of Imperial Legislative Council, and he was thinking as an Indian. He was talking about eradicating smallpox or making efforts to make railways a comfortable place. That means all public good things. And when he talked about Muslims, his specific concern was Indian Muslims. So here I'll say that he was not drawn to this idea of global Muslim identity. And this is a relevant point today also.
Ali Haider Saab, I would just add to what Professor Siddiqui has said. Remember that even during our present times, at a time when there is so much Muslim fundamentalism and terrorism, we know that the Indian Muslims remained aloof of all that. तो सर सैयद से लेके आज तक इंडियन मुस्लिम्स एक अपने में एक एंटिटी हैं एंड दे हैव remained confined to themselves. Sir Syed, nowhere, he invokes a lot of things. But yes, he was aware of some of those movements which were
Yes.
taking place. But nowhere in his works like Asbab, or for example in his book on Bijnor, Asbab-e Sarkashi-e Hind Bijnor, nowhere does he refer or seems to be influenced by any of those movements.
Yes.
So yeah, it was unlike what we find in Allama Iqbal, for example. He's
Yes.
talking.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, he's so much influenced by whatever is happening outside. Sir Sayyid is looking only inwards and nowhere else. There is a question by Mirza Hasnain. Sir Sayyid contributed greatly to learning English and to rationalism. Do we know who were his favorite English poets, novelists, and dramatists? And did he believe in Darwinian theory of evolution? Can you also tell what was Muhammadan Educational Conference? Did it have any all India? Did it had all India influence? In fact,
Yeah, it's
number
very. Let me just address first part of the question first, and of course, Nadine Saab would talk about the second. But uh, you have already mentioned English rationalism. Okay, again, I must say that here this relationship of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and English rationalism is not properly worked out. There is just it is a matter of conjecture, but because those ideas were very much part of ethos at that time, they were very ascendant. So maybe Sir Syed learned something from those ideas. But as far as say English poets, novelists, or dramatists are concerned, he did talk about some important uh, say aspects of English poetry. Say, for example, he was addressing many Urdu poets when he said that Indian writers or Indian poets or Urdu poets, they must also bring in nature in their work. Because you know that in English poetry, nature is a very important element. Nature was a very important element in Romantic poetry. And although a lot of Victorian poetry had a different style, but still nature is a very important part of English poetry as such. So he was talking about English poetry. He was talking about lack of frills in English poetry and exhorting poets to use nature. And also there something of that style which was part of English style. He wanted that to be part of uh, in Urdu poetry also. And you know that he exerted an influence on some important writers, like say for example, Deputy Nazir Ahmad and many others also. Although in 20th century, we'll know that of course what Hali was talking about, a kind of modernist poetics. Hali was also speaking against classical notions of ghazal, that how there are only certain paradigms, certain patterns in ghazals. And Hali also wanted classical ghazal to move away from that tradition and to embrace ideas of nature which were there in English poetry. So that way, we cannot say that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan had any specific English poet who was his favorite, but in general, he was happy with a certain style of poetry. He did meet Charles Dickens when he went when he was there in England. He met Charles Dickens, but I don't think he read Charles Dickens, right? As far as the second part of your question is concerned, Mohammedan Educational Congress, yes, it did have that kind of all India influence. But it had that influence later. And again, and it is again a very important aspect of this, that after Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's death, only a few years after his death, Muslim Educational Conference, in fact, degenerated into certain things. And but during his lifetime, it was a very very positive kind of presence. Because if you see the role of Mohsin al Mulk, who was a very close associate of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, recently Iftikhar Ahmad Khan has written a very interesting book. He handed me a copy of this book, and he has also talked about the role of Mohsin al Mulk. So that does not appear to be a very very uh, say, positive role in many different ways. Because if you look at say Dhaka resolution, those things. So their Muslim Mulk also was part of that. But during Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's time, Muslim Educational Conference had a very different role. Nadeem Saab would add something probably.
I will add to the what I believe are the resources for rationalism which Sir Syed believed in. But before that, are there any other questions, Shagufta? Are there any questions? Well, uh, huh.
There is one.
What was Sir Syed's contribution to Pasmanda Musalman and Ajlaf category of Muslims? Was he against education of lower class of Muslims?
Here, I'll just mention one or two remarks that he made against some lower sections of Muslims. Say, when he was talking about the revolt of 1857, and they are not good remarks. And here we must understand this very important fact that Sir Syed Ahmad Khan also was a man of his class. So, in many ways, he moved away from his feudal background, moved away from his feudal class, but maybe something of that class was responsible for many of those remarks. But when actually he started this college, first the school and then the college, then there was absolutely no discrimination on the basis of one's class or on the basis of one's creed. But there is one reason, because Sir Syed Ahmad Khan employed, and his son Sayyid Mahmud also was part of that. They employed some excellent teachers who studied at Cambridge, many people who had studied at Cambridge, and many people, in fact, who came from England, they stayed here for some time. And one very important thing is and that many of these people were very distinguished people by any standard. And here also I take 2 points from this. I am a student of literature, English literature. Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh worked here. He was employed by Syed Mahmud. He was employed by Syed Mahmud. He was here for 3 years. And Sir Walter Raleigh later became a professor when the chair was introduced there at Oxford. First chair of English, first professor. So that means Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was able to see his promise here. And there also, Nadeem Bhai, this is very interesting. When he was employed as professor, when he was designated as professor, he was employed as professor on the basis of his promise, not on the basis of his performance, not on APA points. But good thing is that after becoming a professor, he produced some very important works. He wrote on Milton, he wrote on Shakespeare, and today he is considered one of the very important names actually in English criticism. So the point here is that how was it possible for Syed Mahmud and Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to employ such people, or Thomas or Arnold, for example? So, and many such people who were people of really class, with and very good people, very accomplished people, even by British standards. Naturally, they had to be paid more. Naturally, they had to be paid more, and at that time, college also did not have say very say good financial condition. So that means the fees was also pretty steep, and when the fees was steep, many people belonging to the lower classes automatically could not say think about getting admission. But as far as the doors of the college was concerned, they were not they were open to everyone, whether Hindus or whether people who belong to the lower classes, for everyone. But since there were certain reasons, of course, the fees was steep, so many of the poor people would have felt deprived, but there was no discrimination as such. But yes, we cannot hold a brief for Sir Syed Khan for many of those remarks which were made by him.
I mean, I would add to what Professor Siddiqui just said. Uh, I won't wish away the negatives of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. but would also try to qualify by pointing out what Asim Siddiqui Sahab pointed out when he started this lecture, and what I also pointed out at the time when I was introducing the topic. And that is that let us not forget the time period when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan existed. We are talking about a man who was living during the 18th century, much before the coming of the modern ideas. Let us also not forget that the man belonged to that section of the society uh, in which, in fact, was the elite society. His, relatives, all the, I mean, his father, grandfather, they were all courtiers, members of the Mughal court. Sir Syed belonged to the Ashraf category. And very categorically, I would say that the Ajlaf were never considered by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to that extent as he was soft towards the children of the elite. The MAO college was basically meant for the elite Muslims, those who belonged to the Zamindar class and those who had been deprived by the government of India after the revolt of 1857. He was not concerned, I'm sorry to say, about the other Muslims. Yes, we keep on citing that. I also said that he was taking chanda from everyone. But what I forgot to tell you at that moment of time, that, for example, the chanda taken from the prostitutes was never used to construct, one of the main buildings of the college. I remember when, during my father's lifetime, when I was living in the university quarters, it was an old building of 19th century in which we were living. At a distance from them, there were a series of toilets, public toilets. And those toilets had been made with the contributions taken by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan from the prostitutes. Remember that for the elite students who were coming to Aligarh, जो मेन हॉस्टल में रहते थे, उनके पास में there was a hostel which was in a way stable as well as the hostel for the Sais.
Morrison Court.
Morrison Court. The intake of the Pasmanda, which, as we understand it today, is something which started in the university, the admissions in a proper sense of the term, only from late 70s and early 80s. उसके पहले हमारा जो अलीगढ़ का कल्चर था वो dominated by the शुरफा कल्चर, जो एक टेंडेंसी, देखिए आज हम उसे गलत कह सकते हैं, बट for a man who belonged to the 18th century, to him that was not wrong. I mean, for example, during the 14th century, when Zia Barni was writing his Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi, which incidentally Sir Syed Ahmad Khan also edited. Edited, yeah. So, Zia Barni's in Zia Barni's imagination, the common people never existed. They were not there at all. When the elites of Delhi were transferred to Daulatabad, Zia Barni wrote कि यहाँ तो चील कौवे उड़ रहे हैं, Iran. There was a flourishing city, in fact, a city जिसमें जरूरत पड़ गई थी कि एक एडिशनल सिटी बनाने की, बट जिया बर्नी is saying that it was all Viran because the common people, the non-Shorafa, were not taken into account. So let us remember, अगर आप आजकल के जो प्रिडिलेक्शन तो उनको पीछे मत ले जाइए और पीछे की जो प्रॉब्लम्स हैं उनको आज की नजर से मत देखिए. That is one of the things which I would like to say. Amna Latif says we have to look at Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's personality, his contribution, his ideas within the time and space to understand his stance on women and minority. She has a point. You know, when Asim Saab just pointed out that Sir Syed was, in fact, I mean, we find him wanting as far as female education was concerned. But let us remember two things. The works which have been done by certain historians from my department and elsewhere on this particular issue, one thing which has come out with clarity is that in the initial phase, Sir Syed was not very averse to the female education. In fact, there are statements of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan where he talks about equality of education to both males and females. He is in favor of education to both these sexes. But ultimately, when he is very near to see his dreams come true, when MAO College is now being established, Sir Syed suddenly loses heart. Why? Possibly one of the reasons which, I mean, वो आदमी जो बात कर रहा हो कि दोनों उस पीरियड में 18th सेंचुरी में कि औरत और मर्द दोनों को तालीम मिलना चाहिए, suddenly we find him very cold towards the women education. We find, like Asim Saab said, that women should get education at home, अपने घर में पढ़ें. And there is a statement of Sir Syed during that period of time when someone asked him कि आप लड़कियों को क्यों नहीं एडमिशन दे रहे हैं, तो he points out कि अरे हमारे बच्चे जो हैं, लड़के जो हैं, जब तालीम याफ्ता हो जाएंगे तो वो अपनी बहनों को, माओं को, सबको सिखाते. They will educate their wives, sisters and daughters. So need is the male education. That is how he doesn't say that they don't need education. He just says कि नहीं वो बाद में हो जाएगा. The question which I was pondering on this, why this sudden change in Sir Syed's attitude towards female education? I might be wrong. I have not worked on Sir Syed at all. My field is medieval India. लेकिन सर सैयद के इंस्टीट्यूशन में रहता हूँ तो थोड़ी बहुत मेरे सामने भी, मेरी आंखों के सामने भी सर सैयद की राइटिंग्स आती हैं. जो भी मैंने समझने की कोशिश की, whatever I have understood, I might be totally wrong. But my belief in this matter is that at a time when Syed was, founding his college, there was an intense opposition to him.
That's right.
There were fatwas by very important ulama, theologians given against him. एक दो नहीं, there were hundreds of fatwas. शरीफ मक्का से भी फतवा बेचारे सर सैयद अहमद खान के खिलाफ मंगा लिया था कि that he is a kafir. I mean, there were even cartoons made with Sir Syed as the villain, as the Satan. Around his body there are snakes which are going to, like him. He's going to hell.
I think just 2 points here can be added. I mean, again, taking lesson from the present. See, for example, we are living in the period of social media. See, just 1 or 2 bad remarks, if they are made against us, we are upset. Now, let us just think about this time when so many formal protests are made against him, fatwas are issued against him, entire groups of people are against him. So naturally, if he faced this kind of odd, so sometimes he was often guided by this reaction, and maybe he did not take many decisions which otherwise he could have taken one. And another important thing is that when he visited England and when he met many educated English women there, and when he met many English women in India also, unlike many of his contemporaries, see, for example, unlike Samiullah, unlike uh, say Mehndi Muslim Mulk, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was full of praise for those liberated English women. Now, it was an unusual thing. Many people in India, they called those liberated English women, they in fact looked at them with suspicion. They criticized their culture. They used bad names to describe them. But Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was able to praise them. He was looking at them with open eyes. So that is also one very important aspect, that he was not creating this false East and West binary, where East is the land of spirituality and West is the land of liberalism, but which has a degenerate kind of culture. He was not creating this binary. So that's why he was able to praise many of those liberated English women also. Yes.
And yes, and then ultimately, when the movement for the establishment of a girls' college was started by Sheikh Abdullah, that Kashmiri Pandit convert who founded Papa Mia, and Alabi, who founded the girls' school at Aligarh. Sir Syed, in fact, and number one, never opposed him, and number two,
Yes.
in fact, goaded him to go ahead and do his work. So, I mean, let us look at things
In
from a
context.
yeah, in a particular context. शायद मेरा अपना belief ये है, as Asim, you have worked on him, that had he allowed at that particular of time when there was a vehement protest against him,
That's right.
had he allowed the girls entry into his college, I think the whole movement would have fallen. The MAO
In
college
fact,
would not have been able to
in
be.
fact, even Papa Mia, for example,
Yes,
say when he was able to convince everyone that there will be proper arrangement of parda in the college, only then parents started sending girls to the girls' school. So that means parda was an important issue for Sir Syed.
right. And before I answer that earlier question, which I said I would answer later on, there is a question by Sajjad Dar, which is an important question. Assalamu alaikum, आसिम साहब ये आपकी तरफ है
Sajjad, I don't have the book at the moment, but I think Shafis will be here in one of the programs, so you'll ask him. I don't have the book at the moment.
National Congress softened after
That is
1890.
true. Yeah, he has written this, but at the moment, I don't have the book. I'll have to see that page number, but certainly it is there. Yeah.
But Sajjad Dar, you being a student of history and a very good student of history in our department, and the department would remember you for a number of years for being a good student. You should remember the time when Sir Syed was, in fact, opposing Indian National Congress. Hume had established Indian National Congress in 1885. And from that period down to the period when ultimately Mahatma Gandhi entered into the scene, what was Congress? An elitist group, unconcerned with the general public of India. They were not fighting for India's independence also, they were collaborators. Let me say. Hume had in fact, जैसे होता है ना प्रेशर कुकर में से स्टीम निकालने के लिए, he had formed this group of the elite Indians all high caste, rich, money people. Um, and that is why Sir Syed Ahmad Khan very contemptuously is referring to them as Bengali Babus. He never, ever, even at the time when he was, whether he ultimately becomes soft or he doesn't become soft, he never ever talks about the fact that Indian National Congress was a Hindu party. He never talks in those terms at all. He only opposes because he finds it to be a party of the Bengali Babus, those आने में जो पैसे वाले अड़हतिया, that type of people, जाहिर है, who doesn't know the type of politics which was being played at that time, who doesn't know about the Hindu iconography which was being added to the Indian national movement also during that period of time before Mahatma Gandhi, even after Mahatma Gandhi. So, and we are talking about the period of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, which is much before that. So I don't think there is anything which makes Sir Syed a suspect. He is not talking in terms of the two communities, Hindus and Muslims, at all. And as Asim Saab says that within a few weeks, Shafi Saab would be here in one of the Saturdays, and please do put up this question to him, and he would be better placed to answer it.
But the page number, even he'll have to look up. But
there is a question by Muhammad Haseen Ahmad. Being a hard-boiled rationalist, how far he has been successful in reconciling with the rampant and dominant Islamic orthodoxy of the concurrent pre-independence era, and his Anglophile profile was despised by most of the muftis of that time. I wonder how he was juggling through these tight ropes.
I think we have been discussing this point. That Sir Syed Ahmad Khan faced those fatwas, very stiff opposition, but he also was a man of convictions. Say, for example, when he talked about his rationalism with reference to religion, he faced very stiff opposition. And why go to his times? Has his tafsir been published after his death? So, are we any better? No. So he faced that opposition, very stiff opposition, but he was a man of conviction. But he was also a man of pragmatism. So he was doing what he wanted to. He established the college, and wherever he wanted to take a kind of pragmatic route, he took that route, established the college. But he also stayed away from many things. Say, for example, he was not part of the theology department. He never imposed his own views. He had those views about Islam, but when theology was a subject in the college, he never imposed his views. So he was very careful also that he held to his views, he held to his convictions, but he did not want to burden others with his views.
Not only that, he didn't, impose his views on the theology department. In fact, what we find is that he tried to hand over the reins of the theology department to a very well-known theologian of that time,
Yeah.
who he personally wrote a letter and invited him to come and take up the assignment.
Yes.
And what did that theologian write back to Sir Syed? He wrote back कि आपके यहाँ अगर in your institution if Shias and Sunnis both are given equal status, then I have nothing to do. How does Sir Syed then retaliate to that? He said, no problems, I don't need you. And he saw to it that two distinct departments under the faculty were established: the Sunni theology as well as the Shia theology. So, in fact,
Nadeem bhai, just a question to you. Do you think that this is very much a legacy of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, that in Aligarh, Shias and Sunnis often offer prayer in the same mosque and sometimes together also, something which is not very common in India?
yes, it is a legacy of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan because there were certain Nawabs from the Hyderabad side who had given chanda for the construction of a Shia mosque separate from the Sunni one. Sir Syed took up the offer, took up the chanda, but saw to it that all those who were students in the college would be praying in the same mosque.
Yes.
So, in fact, after Akbar, the credit of all Muslims praying together in one mosque goes to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan.
That
Now,
is remarkable.
yeah, that is remarkable. So, the fact that Shia theology and Sunni theology were established together with equal rights in the same building, same place, instead of two mosques, only one mosque where both were asked to be equal partners. Hmm. So that is something which
This is
is
remarkable.
which we should remember.
This is remarkable. And since I come from Bareilly, where even Sunnis cannot together in the same mosque.
This, in fact, takes me back to answering the question of from where did Sir Syed Ahmad Khan derive his rationalistic ideas. It was not from Europe. Siddiqui Saab has pointed out that there is hardly any evidence of
That's right.
reading any of those people out there. But we have every evidence to say that Sir Syed, when he got his traditional education, he was brought up in the Mughal tradition, just like Raja Ram Mohan Roy had been. Both the persons, whether it was Raja Ram Mohan Roy of Bengal Renaissance or Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, both of them were educated in the Mughal way of life. And what was that Mughal way of life? It was a way of life which had been, in fact, influenced to a high degree by the policy of Sulh-e-Kul of Akbar. The same elements, tolerance of all, equidistance between all religions, not being a part of it but giving credence to all faiths together, translating works so that one may understand the other. All those projects which had once been initiated by Akbar or followed by Dara Shikoh, in fact, even the strict rule of Aurangzeb had was such that those views could not be washed away, because we find those policies continuing in the later Mughal period, whether it was the reign of Muhammad Shah or, in fact, even Bahadur Shah Zafar, the court which Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's father served. Those were the ideas which these rationalistic aql versus naql. I mean, this is what Sir Syed is doing. Emphasis on naql, rationalism, science, subjects which were included by Akbar in the course curriculums of his period, and cautioning you about blind following, questioning even your religious texts through rationalism. That was the philosophy which had been established in India from the period of the Mughals onwards. The fact that Sir Syed is open to technology. He gave you example about how he accepted typesetting and the markings on the
Movable type.
yeah
Movable type.
movable type and diacritics and so on and so forth. Sir Syed is not averse to any of them. Once again, a tradition which was established in the court in which he had his early learning. All those ideas, naturally, they were tempered with the new ideas of the period when Sir Syed himself was. There was a new type of rationalism which was coming in. There was a question on Darwin. Yes, Sir Syed was very well aware about Darwinism. In fact, he was also under the influence of Darwinism, and that became one of the butt of jokes against Sir Syed Ahmad Khan because the cartoons which were made, they were titled. It was not written Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Yeah, the title under the cartoon was Sir Syed the Naturey, जो डार्विन की थ्योरी को मानने वाला हो. So in fact, there was a continuity and an amalgamation of both the type of ideas which Sir Syed was carrying with him. They were the ideas of the 18th century. None of the ideas were perfect. There were, many issues and problems with the thought of Sir Syed. But remember that he was experimenting. At least he was ready to question things at an age, at a point when none of them was, ready to challenge any of the views which were prevalent during that period of time. You, Hassan, no man is perfect, and Sir Syed was only a man. Although his contribution to the advancement of the community is immeasurable, let's not hold Sir Syed on a pedestal and turn a blind eye to all his shortcomings.
Sure.
No one does, sir. A balanced and objective critique is necessary for an accurate assessment and appraisal of Sir Syed or any other great person for that matter. You, Hassan Saab, you are very correct in pointing that out. And I would direct you to one of the video lectures which I have put up, a lecture which was delivered by Professor Irfan Habib in 2019, uh, which deals with the evolution of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's thought. Uh, it it deals this lecture deals with all the warts and good points of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Similarly, I would ask you that there is one of the very well-known Sir Syed scholars who had also been given an award by the Aligarh Muslim University, David Lilliwell. David Lilliwell ka bhi lecture is uploaded on my channel. Again, you will find the same critical approach. There are certain people related with Aligarh Muslim University who are trying to be very uncritical of Sir Syed. But there are people who are working on Sir Syed related with Aligarh who are looking at Sir Syed with a very critical approach. You are very correct to point out that a full comprehension, a real comprehension of a man can never take place until and unless we take both the points. And fortunately, as far as modern scholarship is concerned, both the viewpoints, good and bad, they are being taken into consideration. But let us remember, when we jump to conclusions, look here, this is what Sir Syed did. Also pay attention. What was the era in which he was living? What was the general thought of that period? And during that thought, what were the elements where Sir Syed was trying to bring about changes? So we do find that Sir Syed was a man of his age. There is no doubt about that. But then a man who was looking towards the future. And with these, words, I think we have passed much time. I must thank Asim Siddiqui for bearing with us. There were a lot of questions which probably were not answered, but I promise that there are a series of lectures which are going to follow as far as Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is concerned. There would be a number of questions. There was a question about the basic readings on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Well, there are a number of good works which have been done. One of the authors is, Lakshmikant Misra ji. Iftikhar Ahmad Khan is one of the authors, but unfortunately, he has written in Urdu one of the remarkable work on Sir Syed, but all his works are in Urdu. So I would
Cambridge Companion is good that way.
Cambridge Companion is good. Shan Muhammad's volumes are good. Shafi Qidwai's new book is good. So there are many writings. We will be bringing Shafi Qidwai, whose book has just come out on Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. So there is much material. You just Google search for it. There is much material which you would find on Sir Syed. I would just end whatever we are discussing by pointing out that next week we have had a lecture on Akbar last week. Today we discuss Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Some aspect of that. He's such a personality that everything cannot be covered in such a short time. Next week we have Professor Purushottam Agarwal, who would be talking to us about Gandhi. And possibly he would also be dealing something with appraising Mahatma Gandhi during the 21st century. His wordings might be different, but this is what I expect that he would be speaking about. I once again thank every one of you. Meet you 7 p.m. Saturday next week. Thank you, everyone.